David took his daughter to a funeral to help a friend. Bad men with guns came to scare the dead man's wife for money. David had 3 seconds to choose: run away safe or help save the woman and her little girl from danger. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. David Martinez adjusted his black tie nervously as he stood outside St. Mary's Cathedral with his 9-year-old daughter Emma. The morning sun cast long shadows across the church steps where dozens of mourners gathered in somber black clothing, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. David didn't know the deceased personally, but Emma's best friend Lucy was inside, saying goodbye to her father who had died in a construction accident just 5 days earlier. As a single father himself, David understood the devastating pain of losing a parent, though in his case, Emma's mother had simply abandoned them when Emma was 3 years old, leaving behind only empty closet space and unpaid bills. "Daddy, why do people die?" Emma asked softly, her small hand gripping his larger one tightly. She wore her only black dress, a hand-me-down from a neighbor that was slightly too big, making her look even smaller and more vulnerable than usual. David knelt down to meet her eyes, the same bright green eyes that reminded him daily of her mother, though Emma had inherited his kind heart and gentle spirit. "Sometimes bad things happen that we can't control, sweetheart. But what matters is how we support each other when life gets hard." Inside the cathedral, the service was already beginning. David and Emma found seats near the back, close to where Lucy's family sat in the front pew. Lucy's mother, Sarah Chin, was a petite woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs as she held her 6-year-old daughter. David had met Sarah briefly at school events and always admired how she managed to smile despite the obvious struggles of raising 2 children while working multiple jobs to support her family. The pastor spoke about Michael Chen's dedication to his family, his work ethic, and his dreams of giving his children better opportunities than he'd had growing up. Michael had immigrated from Taiwan 20 years ago with nothing but determination and hope. He'd learned English by watching television, worked construction during the day and studied accounting at night, slowly building a life for his family in America. As the service continued, David noticed several men in expensive suits sitting near the middle of the church, their behavior seeming oddly out of place. They whispered among themselves, checked their phones repeatedly, and kept glancing around the congregation with suspicious eyes. Something about their presence made David uncomfortable, though he couldn't quite identify why. After the ceremony, the mourners filed outside for the burial service at the adjacent cemetery. The afternoon had grown overcast, with heavy gray clouds threatening rain. David kept Emma close as they walked among the headstones, the gravel crunching softly under their feet. The cemetery was old, with weathered stone markers dating back over a century, tall oak trees providing shade over the peaceful grounds. As they gathered around Michael's gravesite, David noticed those same men from the church positioning themselves strategically around the crowd. His military training from years ago kicked in, recognizing the tactical formation even though he'd been a mechanic, not infantry. Something was definitely wrong. The pastor began the final prayers as Sarah threw a handful of dirt onto her husband's coffin, her tears falling freely. Lucy stood beside her mother, confusion and sadness written across her young face. Other family members and friends offered condolences, sharing memories and promising support during this difficult time. Suddenly, one of the suspicious men stepped forward from behind a large headstone, his hand moving inside his jacket. David's instincts screamed danger as he recognized the telltale motion of someone reaching for a weapon. Time seemed to slow as the man pulled out a chrome pistol, pointing it directly at Sarah Chin. "You owe us money, lady," the gunman shouted, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "Your husband borrowed $50,000 from our organization 6 months ago. The debt doesn't die with him." Sarah stumbled backward, pulling Lucy protectively behind her. "I don't know what you're talking about. Michael never borrowed money from anyone." Construction business was failing, another man called out from across the cemetery. "He came to us desperate, promised to pay back double within 6 months. Time's up." David realized these men were loan sharks, criminals who preyed on desperate people with nowhere else to turn. Michael must have borrowed money to keep his business afloat, trying to provide for his family without telling Sarah about the dangerous situation he'd created. The gunman's finger moved toward the trigger as Sarah held Lucy tightly, both of them trembling with terror. Other mourners screamed and scattered, running between headstones and diving behind monuments for cover. The elderly pastor fell to his knees, praying loudly as chaos erupted around them. Without thinking, David pushed Emma behind a large granite monument and sprinted toward Sarah and Lucy. He had perhaps 3 seconds before the gun fired, 3 seconds to cross 30 feet of open ground and somehow save 2 innocent lives. Get down? David yelled as he launched himself through the air, tackling Sarah and Lucy to the ground just as the pistol exploded with deafening sound. The bullet, intended for Sarah's heart, caught David in the shoulder as he covered both mother and daughter with his body. White-hot pain tore through his arm and chest, but he stayed conscious, using his weight to shield them from any additional shots. "Stay down," he whispered to Sarah, tasting blood in his mouth. "Don't move until the police arrive." The gunman cursed loudly, clearly not expecting anyone to interfere with their intimidation tactics. David could hear sirens approaching in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Someone had called 911 and help was coming. "Let's go," one of the criminals shouted. "Cops are coming." The men fled through the cemetery, disappearing between monuments and jumping into waiting cars parked on the adjacent street. David remained motionless over Sarah and Lucy until he heard police officers shouting commands and securing the scene. "Sir, we need medical assistance over here," an officer called as David finally rolled off the 2 people he'd protected. Blood was soaking through his white dress shirt, and his left arm hung uselessly at his side. Emma ran to her father, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, you're hurt." "I'm okay, baby," David managed to say, though he was growing dizzy from blood loss. "Just a scratch." Sarah sat up slowly, checking Lucy for injuries before turning to look at David with wonder and gratitude. "You saved our lives," she whispered. "You don't even know us, but you risked everything to protect us." Paramedics arrived within minutes, working quickly to stop David's bleeding and stabilize his vital signs. The bullet had passed through his shoulder muscle without hitting any major arteries or bones, though the trauma was significant and would require surgery. As they loaded him into the ambulance, David saw Detective Maria Santos interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence. She approached his stretcher with a serious expression. "Mr. Martinez, I need you to know something important. Those men you helped stop were part of the Valdez crime organization. They've been terrorizing immigrant families for months, using funerals and other emotional occasions to collect debts and threaten victims when they're most vulnerable." David struggled to focus through the pain medication the paramedics had given him. "Will Sarah and Lucy be safe now? We've been trying to build a case against these criminals for over a year," Detective Santos continued. "Your actions today, your willingness to intervene, gave us the evidence and witnesses we needed. We arrested 3 of them 6 blocks away and they're already talking, trying to make deals." The ambulance doors closed, and David was rushed to Metropolitan General Hospital for emergency surgery. Emma rode in a police car behind them, accompanied by a social worker who would stay with her during the operation. In the hospital waiting room, Sarah paced nervously with Lucy sleeping in a chair nearby. She'd insisted on staying despite having no legal obligation or prior relationship with David's family. When the surgeon finally emerged after 3 hours, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Williams announced. "We repaired the muscle damage and removed bone fragments, but there shouldn't be any permanent disability. He'll need physical therapy and several weeks of recovery, but Mr. Martinez should regain full use of his arm." Sarah sobbed with relief, surprising herself with how emotionally invested she'd become in this stranger's well-being. "Can we see him?" "Family only right now," the surgeon replied. "He's still unconscious from anesthesia." "We are family," Sarah said firmly, taking Emma's hand. "He saved our lives. We're not leaving." The next morning, David woke to find Sarah and Emma asleep in chairs beside his hospital bed. Lucy was curled up on a small couch near the window, covered with a hospital blanket. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and David could hear the normal sounds of a functioning hospital outside his room. "You're awake," Sarah said softly, noticing his eyes were open. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot," David replied, managing a weak smile. "But alive, which is better than the alternative." Emma rushed to his bedside, careful not to bump his injured arm. "Daddy, the police lady said you're a hero. She said those bad men can't hurt anyone anymore because of what you did." Before David could respond, Detective Santos entered the room with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as District Attorney James Richardson. "Mr. Martinez, I want to personally thank you for your courage yesterday," the DA said formally. "Your actions not only saved 2 lives but provided crucial evidence in a major criminal investigation we've been conducting for 18 months. Detective Santos opened a thick file folder. "The Valdez organization has been operating a loan sharking business targeting immigrant families throughout the city. They deliberately attend funerals, weddings, and other emotional gatherings where people are vulnerable and witnesses are present but intimidated. Michael Chin did borrow money from them, the DA continued. His construction business was failing due to late payments from contractors, and he was desperate to avoid bankruptcy. He borrowed $50,000 at astronomical interest rates, intending to pay it back within 3 months. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. He never told me. I had no idea we owed anyone money. He was trying to protect you, Detective Santos explained gently. Michael had been making payments, but the interest kept growing faster than he could pay. When he died in the accident, the criminals saw an opportunity to intimidate his widow into paying the full amount immediately. The district attorney looked at David with deep respect. Your intervention yesterday gave us everything we needed to arrest the entire organization. We have witnesses, we have their threats on record, and we have attempted murder charges that will put them away for decades. What happens to Sarah and Lucy now? David asked, his voice still weak from medication. The debt is legally invalid, the DA explained. Loan sharking is illegal and the contracts are unenforceable. Mrs. Chin owes these criminals absolutely nothing. Furthermore, we've frozen their assets and expect to recover most of their illegal profits, which will be distributed to victims like her family. Sarah began crying again, this time with relief and gratitude. I thought we'd have to run away, hide somewhere they couldn't find us. I didn't know how I'd protect Lucy from these people. Over the following days, as David recovered in the hospital, an unlikely friendship developed between the two families. Sarah brought Emma homemade meals and helped with her homework while David slept. Emma and Lucy played quiet games in the hospital room, drawing pictures and reading books together. Sarah learned that David worked as an automotive mechanic at a small garage downtown, earning just enough to support Emma and pay rent on their modest apartment. He'd been a single father for 6 years, handling everything from parent-teacher conferences to birthday parties to bedtime stories without any help or support from extended family. David discovered that Sarah worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving lunch at a school cafeteria during the day, while studying online to complete her accounting degree, something she'd started before Lucy was born but never finished. Michael's death had left her with mortgage payments, medical bills, and the overwhelming responsibility of raising Lucy alone. On David's 4th day in the hospital, Detective Santos returned with unexpected news that would change both families' lives forever. The Valdez investigation has uncovered something remarkable, she announced, settling into a chair beside David's bed. When we searched their financial records, we found evidence of dozens of illegal loans targeting vulnerable families throughout the city. The detective opened her laptop and showed them spreadsheets full of names, amounts, and payment records. The state attorney general's office has decided to file a class action lawsuit against the organization and their associates. The expected settlement could reach several $1 million. Sarah frowned with confusion. What does that mean for us? It means you're about to receive significant compensation for the trauma and threats your family endured, Detective Santos explained. But more importantly for Mr. Martinez, the state has decided to create a civilian heroism fund using money recovered from criminal organizations. David tried to sit up straighter despite the pain in his shoulder. I don't understand. Mr. Martinez, you will receive the first award from this new fund, $50,000 for your heroic actions and medical expenses, plus guaranteed health insurance coverage for you and Emma for the next 5 years. Emma jumped up excitedly. Daddy, does that mean we don't have to worry about money anymore? David was speechless, overwhelmed by the sudden change in their circumstances. 4 years he'd struggled to pay bills, often choosing between Emma's school supplies and his own meals. The money would provide security he'd never imagined possible. But the surprises weren't finished. The district attorney arrived later that afternoon with additional news. Mr. Martinez, your story has attracted attention from the governor's office. Governor Patricia Williams wants to present you with the state's highest civilian honor for bravery, the Governor's Medal of Courage. Furthermore, the DA continued, several local businesses have contacted our office wanting to support you. Martinez Auto Repair has offered you a partnership opportunity, and the Metropolitan Community Foundation wants to establish a scholarship fund in Emma's name. Sarah squeezed David's uninjured hand gently. All of this happened because you chose to help strangers without thinking about yourself. That evening, as visiting hours ended, Sarah lingered beside David's bed while Emma and Lucy colored pictures at the small table near the window. I need to tell you something, Sarah said quietly. What you did at the cemetery, it wasn't just about stopping those criminals or saving our lives. You showed Lucy that there are still good people in the world, people who care about others even when they don't have to. David looked at Lucy, who was carefully coloring a picture of a rainbow with the intense concentration that only children possess. She's been through so much already. No child should have to experience what she's seen. Before yesterday, Lucy had stopped talking about her future, Sarah continued. She stopped making plans or having dreams because everything felt so uncertain and scary. But today she told me she wants to become a police officer so she can protect other kids like herself. Through the window, they could see the city lights beginning to twinkle as evening settled over the metropolitan area. Somewhere out there, other families were struggling with their own challenges, facing their own fears and uncertainties. I keep thinking about all the people who walked away yesterday, David said thoughtfully. All the mourners who ran when the shooting started. I don't blame them, they were protecting themselves and their families. But someone had to do something. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Michael used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action despite fear. Yesterday, you proved that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about loving others enough to face your fears. The next morning brought more visitors and more recognition. The hospital's public relations department had organized a small ceremony in David's room, attended by the mayor, several city council members, and representatives from various community organizations. Mayor Jennifer Rodriguez presented David with a key to the city and announced that October 15th would be officially designated as Community Hero Day in metropolitan area. Mr. Martinez represents the best of our community spirit, the mayor declared. His selfless actions remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose love over fear. Local television crews filmed the ceremony, and by evening, David's story had spread across social media platforms and national news networks. The hashtag Cemetery Hero began trending, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of everyday heroes who had made differences in their communities. But for David, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. As the official visitors left and the cameras were packed away, an elderly man in a maintenance uniform knocked softly on the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Martinez? I'm Carlos Valdez." David tensed at the familiar last name, wondering if this was somehow related to the criminals who had threatened Sarah. Carlos seemed to understand his concern and quickly raised his hands peacefully. "Not those Valdez people, sir. Different family entirely. I work maintenance here at the hospital, been mopping these floors for 15 years. The old man stepped closer, his eyes filled with deep respect. "I wanted to thank you personally. You see, my daughter Rosa was killed by those same criminals 2 years ago. She borrowed money to pay for her son's medical treatment, and when she couldn't pay it back fast enough, they made an example of her." Carlos's voice broke with emotion as he continued. "The police couldn't prove anything back then. Those criminals were too smart, too careful. But what you did, the way you stood up to them in front of all those witnesses, it finally gave the police what they needed to arrest them." David reached out with his good arm to shake Carlos's weathered hand. "I'm sorry for your loss. No one should have to go through what your family experienced. Rosa would have been proud of you," Carlos said simply. "She always taught my grandson that real strength comes from protecting others, especially people who can't protect themselves." After Carlos left, David reflected on the ripple effects of that single moment of decision at the cemetery. He'd acted instinctively without considering consequences or calculating risks. Yet that split-second choice had impacted dozens of lives: the criminals who were now in jail, the families who were finally safe from their threats, the community that had been inspired by his example. Sarah returned that evening with dinner from a nearby restaurant, accompanied by Emma and Lucy, who had spent the day together at the Children's Museum. The girls had bonded over their shared love of science exhibits and interactive displays. "The doctor says you can go home tomorrow," Sarah announced, setting containers of food on the small table. "Emma and I have been talking and we'd like to help with your recovery. Lucy and I could stay at your apartment for a few days, just to make sure you're managing okay." David was touched by her offer but concerned about imposing. "That's very kind, but you have your own life to rebuild. You shouldn't feel obligated to take care of us." Sarah sat down beside his bed with a serious expression. "David, you saved our lives. You took a bullet meant for me. The least I can do is make sure you eat proper meals while you recover." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Daddy, I like having Lucy around. She's teaching me how to braid friendship bracelets." Lucy nodded enthusiastically. "And Emma is showing me how to play chess. She's really smart." Over the following weeks, as David's shoulder healed and his strength returned, the two families spent increasing amounts of time together. Sarah helped Emma with her math homework while David assisted Lucy with a science project about solar systems. They shared meals, watched movies, and slowly began to feel like an extended family. The criminal trial began 2 months later, with David testifying about the events at the cemetery. His testimony was crucial in securing convictions against all 5 members of the Valdez loan sharking organization. The ringleader received 25 years in prison, while his associates received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years. During the trial, more victims came forward with their own stories of intimidation and threats. The prosecution presented evidence of systematic targeting of immigrant families, elderly individuals, and single parents, vulnerable populations who were less likely to report crimes or seek police protection. The judge's final statement during sentencing captured the significance of David's actions. Mr. Martinez's courage at that cemetery didn't just save 2 lives that day. It broke up a criminal organization that had terrorized dozens of families for years. His willingness to act when others couldn't or wouldn't represents the best of human nature. 6 months after the shooting, David returned to work with full use of his arm and a new perspective on life's priorities. The partnership offer from Martinez Auto Repair had materialized into a genuine opportunity to expand his skills and increase his income significantly. Sarah had completed her accounting degree and found a position with a nonprofit organization that provided financial counseling to low-income families. Her work involved helping people avoid the same kind of predatory lending situations that had trapped Michael. The relationship between their families had evolved naturally from gratitude to friendship to something deeper and more meaningful. Emma and Lucy considered themselves sisters in everything but name, sharing secrets, inside jokes, and dreams about their futures. One evening in late spring, as David and Sarah sat on his apartment balcony watching their daughters play in the courtyard below, Sarah brought up a conversation they'd been avoiding for months. "I need to ask you something important," she said nervously. "What we have now, this friendship, this connection between our families, is it just because of what happened at the cemetery? Is it based on gratitude and trauma, or is there something real here?" David had been wrestling with the same question for weeks. "I think about that day often. Not just the shooting but the moment I first saw you holding Lucy during the funeral service. Even before the violence, before the heroics, I was drawn to your strength and dignity." Sarah smiled, relieved by his honesty. "Michael used to tell me that love comes in many forms. Sometimes it's passionate and overwhelming like in movies, but sometimes it's quiet and steady, built on respect and shared values and genuine care for each other's well-being. What we have feels like the second kind," David admitted. "It's not dramatic or complicated. It's just right." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Emma teach Lucy how to ride a bicycle in the small courtyard. The evening air was warm with the promise of summer, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear music from a neighbor's radio. A year after the cemetery shooting, David and Sarah were married in a small ceremony at the same church where Michael's funeral had been held. The symbolism was intentional, transforming a place of tragedy into a setting for new beginnings and hope. Emma served as maid of honor while Lucy was the flower girl, both girls beaming with happiness as they officially became sisters. Detective Santos attended the ceremony, along with Carlos Valdez, Mayor Rodriguez, and dozens of community members whose lives had been touched by David's story. During his wedding speech, David reflected on the unexpected ways that life can change in a single moment. "A year ago, I thought I was just taking my daughter to support a friend during a difficult time. I had no idea that one afternoon would transform our entire lives. I learned that heroism isn't about seeking recognition or reward. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that someone else's pain is our pain, and that love requires action, even when that action involves risk." Sarah added her own thoughts about resilience and second chances. "Michael always believed that America was a place where ordinary people could build extraordinary lives through hard work and determination. David proved that it's also a place where strangers become family, where communities support each other, and where one person's courage can create ripples of positive change that last for generations." The couple established a nonprofit organization called the Michael Chin Foundation, dedicated to providing emergency financial assistance to immigrant families facing exploitation by predatory lenders. The foundation also offered educational programs about financial literacy and legal rights, helping vulnerable populations protect themselves from criminal organizations. Emma and Lucy, now teenagers, volunteer with the foundation regularly, sharing their story with other young people about the importance of community involvement and social responsibility. Emma plans to study criminal justice in college, inspired by the detectives and prosecutors who worked on their case. Lucy wants to become a social worker, motivated by her desire to help families navigate crisis situations. 5 years after the cemetery shooting, the Metropolitan Community Foundation honored David with its highest award for sustained community service. The ceremony was held at the same cemetery where the original incident occurred, now transformed into a peaceful memorial garden dedicated to victims of violent crime. Standing beside Michael Chen's grave, which had been beautifully landscaped with flowers and a small bench for visitors, David spoke to the gathered crowd about the ongoing responsibility that comes with surviving trauma and finding purpose in pain. "I didn't set out to become anyone's hero," he said simply. "I just saw a mother and daughter who needed protection and I acted on instinct. But I've learned that heroism isn't a single moment. It's a daily choice to keep serving others, to keep building community, to keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, David and Sarah remained by Michael's grave with their daughters, now 16 and 13 years old. They left fresh flowers and stood in silence for several minutes, honoring the man whose death had somehow brought their families together. Lucy placed her hand on her father's headstone and spoke quietly, "Daddy, I want you to know that David has been a wonderful stepfather, but he could never replace you. He's taught me that it's possible to love more than one father, and that families can grow in unexpected ways without forgetting the people we've lost." Emma added her own thoughts. "Mr. Michael, even though I never got to meet you, your sacrifice brought my dad and me a real family. Thank you for raising Lucy to be such an amazing sister, and thank you for showing us that love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes form." As they walked back through the cemetery together, past the hundreds of headstones marking other lives and other stories, David reflected on the mysterious ways that tragedy and triumph interweave in human experience. One terrible afternoon had cost Michael Chen his life, traumatized a young widow and her daughter, and put a criminal organization's plans into motion. But that same afternoon had also revealed the power of instinctive courage, created the evidence needed to stop dangerous criminals, brought two lonely families together, and inspired a community to support vulnerable populations more effectively. The bullet that was meant to silence Sarah's voice had instead amplified it, giving her a platform to advocate for other immigrant families facing similar threats. The trauma that could have destroyed Lucy's faith in human goodness had instead taught her that heroes exist in ordinary people who choose extraordinary actions. And David, who had simply tried to protect two strangers from harm, had discovered that sometimes the most important decisions happen too quickly for analysis or doubt. They emerge from the deepest parts of ourselves, from values and love that we might not even know we possess until circumstances demand their expression. Walking home with his wife and daughters under the setting sun, David understood that heroism isn't about seeking opportunities to save people. It's about being prepared, emotionally and spiritually, to act with love when those opportunities inevitably present themselves in the course of ordinary life.